So again, welcome to this workshop, the DANS data trail, explore new tools for your FAIR toolkit. And our program for today is, can you move to the next slide, Kim? Will be first Ingrid Dillo will tell us more about overall the FAIRsFAIR project and DANS and the tools that from the FAIRsFAIR project. Then we will have Eko Indato explaining more about the HEIS tool. And after that, Claudia Engelhardt saying more about the FAIR teaching handbook. And then we will have breakouts on both of these tool sets, let's say. And it will be wrapped up and closed with some notes on the new projects by Ingrid Dillo. But first of all, I would like to give the floor to Ingrid. Ingrid is our Deputy Director at DANS, and she's also the Treasurer of the Board of the Core Trust Seal. And very relevant in this case, Ingrid has been the project coordinator of the European Horizon 2020 project FAIRsFAIR, and will be leading the FAIR Impact project. Ingrid, please go ahead and tell us what you would like to share.
Thanks very much, Ellen. Can you hear me? I think so. Perfect. So also from my side, welcome everybody. It's really nice to be here this afternoon in this small group of people that we have, and I'm especially looking forward to the breakout sessions where we will be able to do some more hands-on stuff. But before we go there, it's good to start with a bit of overview. So if I can have the next slide, please. First, a few words about DANS. So as probably many of you know, DANS is the National Center of Expertise and also a national repository for research data in the Netherlands. And in our services, we have at the moment a bit over 200,000 data sets. And these data sets are divided over 4 services that we call data stations. These services are domain specific and they are focused on end users. And you can see them here on the right-hand side also in that graph. Next to those 4 domain specific data stations in which we have data, we also provide DataVersNL, which provides an option to institutions to set up their institutional repositories, so generic ones, but institutionally based. Now, all of these data stations and the repositories in DataVersNL are connected to what we call our DANS data vault that you see in the middle. And that really is our long-term archive. And through the combination of all of those services, we are also able to provide certified trustworthy digital repository service. So that is one end, you could say one leg that DANS stands on as a national repository. On the next slide, you can see the other leg of DANS, and that leg is the leg of the Center of Expertise that DANS also is. And within DANS, we have a large team of research data experts, and they provide expertise. This can happen more on a one-on-one base, but it also for a big part happens in the context of both national and European projects. So they provide expertise in the areas that you can see here on the slide around FAIR and open data, research data management, also the certification of digital archives and the monitoring and analysis of what's happening in the research data landscape. Next slide. So these are the 2 legs that DANS stands on, but DANS is of course not the only one. If we look at the Dutch landscape, we see multiple actors there, and DANS is an active collaborator with many of them. If you look at the left-hand side, you see that DANS is one of the main national service providers in the Dutch data landscape. Next, of course, to SURF and the eSign Center for software. On the right-hand side, you see the main domain-specific service providers. So you see organizations like DTL for the life sciences, 40U research data for the more technical sciences, and also the research infrastructures for the social sciences and the humanities, HEIS and CLARIA. And again, DANS is part of the HEIS and CLARIA infrastructures and also works closely together with the other two. And on the bottom of this overview, you can see a couple of coordination networks and coordination bodies that we have in the Netherlands, like LCRDM, Research Data Netherlands, and also, of course, MPOS, the National Platform for Open Science. And again, in all of these, DANS is active. So collaboration is in our blood, so to speak. And that leads me to the next slide, because not only do we try to collaborate with all our partners in the national context, we also do so in the European context. And one example of that has been, I should say, the FAIRsFAIR project, which was a project that DANS coordinated, funded by the European Union, that just ended at the end of February, and that ran for 3 years. And on this slide, you can see that we worked with 22 partners overall in that project, coming, if I remember correctly, from 8 different member states. So that was quite a big project that played an important role in DANS over the last 3 years, and it was a project of 10 million euros. So the idea was that we would also establish something with such a big budget. So what did we do? Maybe the next slide. Let's start with what was FAIRsFAIR meant to do. Now, the core of this, at the heart of this project, really was to make sure that we create tools and practical solutions to implement the FAIR principles in the European Open Science Cloud. And as some of you may know, in 2018, an expert group commissioned by the EC wrote a report called Turning FAIR into Reality, in which they came up with numerous recommendations on how to make FAIR a reality. So this, to a certain extent, was the basis of the work that we did in the project, and we really tried to come up with practical solutions, fostering a fair data culture, and also promoting the uptake of good practice in making data fair. So that was the objective that we tried to reach in these 3 years. And on the next slide, you can see what came out of that after 3 years. As you can see, we have now 239 entries in our Zenodo FAIRsFAIR collection community. So there are 239 different kinds of outputs in all shapes and sizes and forms that came out of this project that are openly available for everybody to look at and to use. Now, these outputs concentrate really on 3, you could say, sets of outputs: guidance in all shapes and forms, practical tools, and also training. And you could say that this is spread over a number of areas of activities. So we have these instruments produced in the area of fair data practices, fair data policies, certification of repositories, and also education and support. Now, if you look at the right-hand graph that I have on this slide, you can see that there are 2 elements in red, and these are the 2 outputs of the project that we will concentrate on today. You will learn more about today. The first one is around pilots that we developed, so tools to support the assessment of fair data in trustworthy repositories. So this is about HEIS that you will hear more of. And the second one is around the FAIR Competence Adoption Handbook for universities. So these 2 elements we will zoom in on today, and you will learn all about them. If you are interested in any of the other outputs, you can see now that you can find them on Zenodo, but of course also on the FAIRsFAIR website, you will find the main outputs and a lot of information about them. So if you then move to the next slide, I would like to highlight 2 outputs that are closely related to the ones that we are diving into today. So I said that we will look give a very close look to the adoption handbook, and that will be done by Claudia. But this adoption handbook that was produced was accompanied by a document that is really, you could say, a kind of twin product. And that document is an overview of a couple of good practices, so really hands-on examples. The handbook itself provides support for higher education institutions to help them to integrate FAIR-related content in their curricula and teaching at the different levels, so bachelor, master, and also postdoctoral, I think. This guide that we have next to that presents 7 very practical use cases, examples where institutions have already been addressing FAIR competencies in their education and training programs. And if you look at the part of the index of that document, you can see that there are examples from different countries in Europe, Germany, Portugal, Austria, Finland, Switzerland, Portugal, again, yes. And finally, also one outside of the European Union, namely South Africa. So this is very interesting material. And I just said to Claudia, have you looked in Zenodo? Because this document that was produced in December also already had a lot of views and a lot of downloads. So that really shows that it contains valuable information. The second output that we're going to look at is the HEIS tool. Now, the HEIS tool, as you can see in this slide, is a tool that helps you to assess the fairness of data that have already been published and are available, for example, in a data repository. This tool is accompanied by a twin tool that we produced in FAIRsFAIR, and that twin tool is called FAIRaware, and is a tool that you use much earlier on in the research data lifecycle, really at the start of a project. It is meant as an awareness raising tool for researchers, and they can use it as early in the process as possible, of course. And it is really a tool to test their FAIR awareness. And for that, you can see on the next slide, it uses very simple questions about the data and the metadata. So it helps the researcher to think about the important elements around the 4 FAIR principles. And not only gives it a kind of a score in how what your grade of FAIR awareness is, much more importantly, if you answer that some elements are not known to you, you get a lot of explanation. So it helps you also as a kind of a learning tool, and it also provides all kinds of links to relevant materials to make sure that the awareness around the implementation of FAIR principles grows. So this is a nice twin tool that is really the mirror from of the HEIS tool. So I wanted to highlight these 2. And I think with that, I would like to end this part. And I think we now dive further into the HEIS tool and the adoption handbook. And I hand over to Ellen for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ingrid. Yeah, we will continue with Eiko, who's our colleague at DANS and whose role is a research and development engineer. He has been involved in all kinds of developments around data first, and for example, was involved in creation of the archive in a box with vocabulary support. But today he will introduce us to the HEIS tool that was improved in the FAIRsFAIR project. So go ahead, Eiko.
Thank you, Ellen, and welcome everybody. Today, I will give a presentation about the HEIS tool. If you have any question during the presentation, please send them in the chat, and we will go through each of them at the end or in the breakout session. This is a short overview of the topics that we will go over during this presentation. 1. FAIRsFAIR data object assessment matrix and tooling. FUJI application architecture. 3. Fairness maturity level and scoring. 4. Using FUJI.NET. And the last one, 5. Result of the FUJI.NET. This talk focus on the web client FUJI.NET. Starting with the first point. FAIRsFAIR data object assessment matrix and tooling. To be able to perform automatic FAIR assessment, at least two components are needed. These are assessment matrix and tool. The assessment matrix have been derived from the RDA FAIR data maturity model indicators created by the RDA working group FAIR data model maturity model, which was established in January 2019. So we have FAIR assessment matrix and data or metadata, which need to have their fairness measured by using tools. The tools help users understand how to achieve a state of fairness and how this can be measured and improved. On FAIRsFAIR.org, you can find a list of tools which are categorized into 3 execution types. These are manual assessments by means of questionnaires or checklists, semi-automated, automated assessments, which you can use for machine to machine. As you can see on this slide, on the table on the left side, a list of 17 FAIRsFAIR data assessment metrics. These are 17 defined assessment metrics that address 12 of the total of the 15 FAIR principles at both data and metadata level. On the right side, there are 15 FAIR principles. The FAIR principle not addressed by assessment metric are A1.1 open protocol, A1.2 authentication and authorization, and I2 FAIR vocabularies. To measure the research data objects level or fairness, FUJI currently uses the FAIRsFAIR data object assessment matrix version 0.4. FUJI conducts at least one test per assessment matrix, except for the FSF A201M metric that metadata must remain available even if the data is no longer available. This does not contribute to the fairness of an existing data object, but instead to a deleted object, and therefore cannot be tested automatically. Let's focus on the image on the right side, FSF F101D. What could be the meaning of that? It starts with the shortened form of the project's name, followed by the related FAIR principal identifier and local identifier. The last part of the identifier distinguishes the resource that will be evaluated based on metrics or data. Based on the metric data or metadata. D is data, M is metadata. For each metric, there is a different test that is administered. Per metric, FUJI has implemented one or more tests. The example on the slide describes those tests. Please take a minute to look through it. For example, matrix FSF F101D, data is assigned a precedent identifier, can be evaluated by 2 practical tests. The first test verifies if a given identifier is based on a known persistent identifier scheme or syntax. And the second test checks if the identifier resolves to a digital resource or landing page of the object. As mentioned before, an overview of the FAIR assessment tool can be found on fairsfar.org. Feel free to take a look at this after the presentation. One of the tools that helps users understand how to achieve a state of fairness automatically is FAIR tool. The F stands for FAIR and UJI means test or exam in Malay or in Indonesian. So FAIR is FAIR testing tool. Later, we will focus on FAIRsFAIR.net. FAIR is a web service, a REST API to programmatically assess a fairness of research data objects. It is based on metrics developed by the FAIRsFAIR project. The service will evaluate data objects in repositories. There are different ways to use FAIR. You may download it from GitHub, install and run FAIR instance on your own server. You can also use Docker to deploy the service in your own Docker environment or Kubernetes cluster. Another way is by using the web demo client by means of accessing FAIR.net for quick, fair checks on data sets. Next, I will discuss the second topics, the FAIR architecture on high level. In general, this is what FAIR's architecture looks like. In short, when a user fills in the form in the graphical user interface with a research data objects, such as DOI, and then they click the Start FAIR Assessment button, it will send a request as a post request to the FAIR API, as it is shown in the diagram. Here, you can see two main components that FAIR is made up of. The graphical user interface, which is a website, the REST API that performs and the actual FAIR assessment. It is an open API Swagger implementation. It has two endpoints. Evaluate, this perform the assessment, metrics, endpoint to retrieve the metrics. Also, the outside world or internet is visible as third component. This is where online services such as data site and online catalogs live. FAIR adheres to existing web standards and PID resolution services, best practices, and utilizes external registries and resources such as retrieve data and dataset APIs and SPDX license lists, etc. You don't have to remember this architecture, but I'm showing it here because the terms FAIR.net and FAIR and components get mixed up very easily. Next slide is the third topic, that is fairness, maturity levels, and scoring. Before we start assessment, I would like to inform you on the maturity levels and scoring that FAIR reports on. FAIR uses 4 maturity levels derived from CTS capability maturity level. There are 3 and FAIR adds 4th level, which is incomplete. On this slide, you can see a link to the document where you can view information about 3 trial models. Per FAIRsFAIR metric and also RDA indicators, a description is available on when compliant to a given level is met. If at least one metric of a given principle has reached initial, the corresponding principle cannot have a lower level, even if all other metrics are scored lower. Thus, it is considered to have reached the initial level. All levels above initial are calculated as the rounded mean of a metric scores for a given principle. The overall FAIR FAIR level for a given research data object would analogously be calculated as rounded mean of all principal scores. Now we know some more about the FAIR internals. During the breakout session, I will talk in more details about topics number 4, that is FAIR using FAIR.net, and discuss what it takes for a user to do FAIR assessments with FAIR.net. Disclaimer, however, please bear in mind that the service is not in production yet, so there are no guarantees regarding availability. The last topic is about results of the FAIR.net. The output of the result indicates the fairness of the research data object that is being tested. Maturity levels for each metric and principle in complete, initial, moderate, and advanced. Per dataset, FAIR reports on the scores that are earned per principle based on the associated test performed and the maximum scores attainable. In the result presented, these scores are also aggregated per main principle. Findable earns a maximum 7, accessible earns a maximum of 3, interoperable earns a maximum of 4, and reusable earns a maximum of 10, which add up to a total FAIR score of at most 24. After you do your assessment, the summary will come up as it shown in the slide. In the breakout session, we will going in depth. If you want some more information, these are great resources to check out. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining. Hopefully everyone has learned more about FAIR, and I'll see you in the breakout session, hopefully.
Thank you, Eiko. Thank you a lot. There is a question in the chat, if you could. So it's, can FAIR only be used for data or also other types of research output that have a persistent identifier?
I cannot see where is the question, but I need to stop remote control, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. As long as that FAIR can look to that, to the metadata or data, and then can examine that, it is okay, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so, and if you want to know more, you certainly will look, you can test it out also yourself in the breakout. So see what the results are. I would like to now go to the next speaker, that is Claudia Engelhardt. I know Claudia is a serious supporter of FAIR and open science, and knowledgeable in the fields of research data management and data curation and training. And she has been involved in the FAIRsFAIR project from the Göttingen State and University Library, but she has recently moved to Dresden, and but is still willing to introduce us to the FAIR teaching handbook. I'm very grateful for that, and would like to give the floor to you now, Claudia.
Thanks, Ellen. And yeah, hello to everyone from my side. And thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to present the handbook here. It's a pleasure. So my talk will be divided or will have 3 parts roughly. Next slide, please. So first I will talk a bit about the creation of the handbook. Then I will present the components of the handbook. And on my last slide, talk a bit about future prospects. So the creation of the or before I go into these parts, what's the main purpose of the handbook? So the title, How to Be Fair with Your Data, a teaching and training handbook for higher education institutions, already gives us a hint. So it's targeted primarily at higher education institutions, and it provides guidance and practical support with integrating the FAIR principles or content related to the FAIR principles into curricula and teaching at universities and other higher education institutions. It was published as a project deliverable in PDF format on Zenodo in December 2021, and you can retrieve it via this DOI. Next slide, please. So the creation of the handbook was quite an endeavor, actually. So we did it collaboratively, involving members of the community. So the initial creation happened during 6 3-hour book sprint sessions in June 2021, in which about 40 collaborators took part, all experts. There was a subsequent editorial process. There was a public consultation then in August and September, where we got a lot of feedback from the community, which we afterwards integrated, and the final version was published in December 2021 on Zenodo. By now, there is also a Gitbook version, which will be easier to update and work with for potential, or with regard to potential future updates of the content. And coming soon is also a print edition and an open access PDF edition with Göttingen University Press. Next slide, please. So, who are the primary target audiences of the handbook? It's basically staff members of higher education institutions in different roles, because when you want to get FAIR into the curricula, different roles need to be involved. So first of all, there are, of course, those who create and teach lessons and courses. So lecturers, professors, trainers, and people in similar roles. But there are also staff members who design, adapt, and implement curricula, so more on a meta level. For example, doctoral program managers or deans. There are also staff members training and consulting students and early career researchers or researchers in general. And finally, people dealing more with institutional strategies, policies, administrative workflows, and so forth, like vice rectors, presidents of higher education institutions, offices of research. So these are the primary target audiences. So the focus is really on higher education institutions, but the handbook will also be of use to other people as well. So basically anyone who is involved in teaching and training with regard to research data management and the FAIR principles. And I think one could actually also use the handbook for self-education, although there are other tools for this as well, of course. Next slide, please. So this is a brief overview of the content. There are 6 main chapters. So the first one, motivation and about this book, are grayed out a bit because they are not really the fleshy parts. These are chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we have one chapter that deals with the competences and the skills that are actually necessary to implement FAIR. Then we have a chapter on teaching and training designs for FAIR. We have a chapter with 16 lesson plans. And finally, there's one on implementing FAIR on the institutional level. Next slide, please. So what comprises the FAIR skills and competences part of the book? There are mainly two parts. So firstly, we have created FAIR competence profiles for the bachelor level, the master level, and the doctoral level that define the skills and competences as well as the level of these for these three educational levels. And we have also created corresponding learning outcomes for these. And the work with regard to this chapter was based on work that was done in FAIRsFAIR earlier, the FAIR competence framework for higher education. Next slide. So here you see an example or part of the table with the competence profiles. In the column on the left side, you see the different skills and competences or topics. And then in the columns next to it, you see the level that is required for bachelor, master, and PhD students. And there's also a column that states if this is entry level or this is regarded as entry level content or not. And on the next slide, we see an example of the learning outcomes. So here in the left column, you have again the topics or the skills and competences. Next to it, the required level. So this is the table for the doctoral level or part of the table for the doctoral level. So the requirements are relatively high. And in the column on the right side, you see the learning outcomes. And they also have different levels indicated with by the small letters in square brackets at the front of each. So you can see which learning outcomes are considered basic, intermediate, and advanced. So that's it for the skills and competences chapter. Next, let's have a very brief look at teaching and training designs. That's just this one slide. So in this chapter, we actually go into the different phases of course design and think about relevant aspects there. So these phases are selecting and identifying the learning outcomes. Based on that, selecting and developing learning experiences. And by learning experiences, we basically mean different types of teaching or learning settings. So for example, a workshop, a lecture, a seminar, or something like that. Then some advice on selecting content, identifying and developing assessments, and finally evaluating course effectiveness. Next, we get to the lesson plans. So here you see a list of the 16 lesson plans that are included in the handbook now. So they cover different aspects of the FAIR principles and or research data management in general, because these two fields are actually pretty much intertwined. The list of lesson plans or the topics of the lesson plans are not exhaustive. So we did what we could do with the capacities that were available. So not every little aspect is covered, but yeah, this might be something for the future. Who knows? Let's look a bit more in detail at the lesson plans or this chapter. So what you will find there as well, and don't fret, I'm not going to go into this in detail, just mention that this table exists. So this is a mapping of the lesson plans to the FAIR principles. So if you're interested in this, please check it out in the handbook. It's on page 49. So here you can see basically which individual principle is covered or touched upon in each lesson plan. So next slide. The lesson plans follow a common structure. So each lesson plan tries to cover the following components. First, it mentions the FAIR elements that are concerned. It defines the primary audiences for the specific lesson plan. The learning outcomes, then there is a summary of tasks and actions that are suggested for a lesson on this topic. A list of materials and equipment which are necessary, then the references, and not every lesson plan has this, but most of them do, a take-home task. Next, let's just look at an example very briefly of a lesson plan. So here you can see the different components, and this is actually the shortest lesson plan. It's the one on documentation. Next slide, please. So I'm coming almost to the end. Chapter 6 is about implementing FAIR. So the angle is a bit of a different one. So it's directed, or it's talking about implementing FAIR at the institutional level. And the subchapters deal with policies, data management planning, then data processing and documentation, the necessary support infrastructure. There's a subchapter on data publication and on data reuse. And finally, a few words on the next slide about the future of the handbook. So we do have the PDF on Zenodo. There's also the Gitbook version, which is hosted or will be hosted and technically maintained by the University of Minho for at least 3 years. But this does not include actually updates or maintenance of the content. So with regard to that, we approached community initiatives that are not project-based to suggest the handbook as something that they might want to deal with and work on in the future. So specifically, we approached the RDA interest group on education and training on the handling of research data and the open air training community of practice. And the signs that we got from them were positive, although no definite commitment has been made, of course. But it's been considered, so to speak. And soon, there will also be a print version of the handbook, and I actually already have the test print here. It's expected to come out end of April, beginning of May. The final Gitbook link, as well as information regarding the print and open access version, will be made available on also via the Zenodo record. So all information will be collected there. And that's it from my side. Happy to answer a few questions now if there are any, or in the breakout group.
Thank you, Claudia. There's a question in the breakout. Which higher education is meant? Is it just universities or also for applied sciences?
Universities, as well as universities, or yeah, they're not called universities in Dutch, like hogeschool.
Okay.
So yeah, both levels. So basically anything beyond what you would call grammar school or high school. So yeah, all kinds of higher education.
Yeah. Yeah, it was also answered by Marjan now, I see. So I'll stop the recording.
Thanks,
Have in this session to give you a couple of hints about what we are planning to do in the next 3 years. And that is all in the context of a new European EU funded project. That project is called FAIR Impact. If you could bring up the next slide, Kim. That project is again coordinated by DANS. We again have 3 years to deliver what we promise in this project, with a budget again of 10 million euro. This time we have even more partners in the consortium, 28 in total. So for us, it's also quite a challenge how we deal with this complexity. These 28 partners and affiliate entities come from 11 member states, plus the UK, we need to say these days, unfortunately. Next to DANS, SURF is also involved in this project as a Dutch partner. So this project will, on the one hand, continue building on the results of FAIRsFAIR and continue to be active in the different domains that FAIRsFAIR was active. But it also has a couple of new accents in it. So again, it is a project that is aimed at the implementation, the practical implementation of the FAIR principles for the European Open Science Cloud. But there is a specific focus on making sure that we do that across scientific domains and across the different research outputs. And all of that also on different levels, European, national, and institutional. So what it means in practice that we will try to identify all kinds of components that can help us implementing the FAIR principles, so practices, policies, tools, technical specifications. We try to identify them in the different domains and also try to translate them to make them useful in other domains. So this is across domains, but also from across research outputs. So there will be less single focus on data. We will also look at things like software, code, ontologies, vocabularies, etc. So in that sense, the project broadens. And we will do this in the project in close collaboration with the so-called S3 clusters. These are research infrastructures / projects with a very domain-specific focus. So you might have heard of Elixir, for example, in the life sciences. So they are now partners in this project. Next slide. Here you see an overview of the design of the project, and you see here that the areas that we will focus on are persistent identifiers, metadata and ontologies, metrics, certification and guidelines, but with a strong focus on engagement, adoption and implementation across domains and across different research outputs. And in work package 5 of this new project, we will also continue to work on the 2 tools for FAIR assessment. So the idea is that with respect to HEIS, we will try to improve HEIS and its functionality even more. But also we are going to dive into the possibility of creating more domain-specific tools. And what we will also do is continue working on FAIRware, because that also is a tool that is quite appreciated and can still be improved and expanded. So that is just one tiny bit of the project. Unfortunately, we will not continue the work that we have been doing in FAIRsFAIR in the area of training and skills and professionalization, because there is a whole new separate project that is starting around the same time that is called FAIR Skills for EOSC. And that is, again, a multi-million European funded project that will focus solely on the training aspects and professionalization aspects of FAIR. But we have a lot of partners that are involved in all of these projects, so we will have a nice synchronizations with them, I'm sure. So then we have a last slide that says a little bit about how we will try to engage different domains and different communities and also provide support. So we are doing that with different instruments. Within the project, we have around €500,000 that we are going to use to work on domain-specific use cases around FAIR implementation, all kinds of very practical examples that we will translate from one domain to the other. But next to that, we also have €500,000 on the shelf that we will distribute amongst organizations in Europe outside of the project, And we will distribute that money in small grants where people can really get some money to implement, adopt solutions that we produce in the project. So there is also an opportunity for others and maybe also for organizations in the Dutch landscape to participate through these cascading grants that will be announced in calls. We will also provide in-kind support, so people working within the project are available to help give hands-on support really for the adoption of FAIR tools and practices. So there are all kinds of ways to interact with the project. We don't have our website up and running yet. I did give the URL already on one of the slides, so keep an eye out on that. We will also have a presence on social media and Twitter, YouTube, you name it. So anybody who is interested, keep an eye out for FAIR Impact that will start next month in June. No, we're not yet May. So a little bit longer, you need to wait, but around 6 weeks, we will be in the air. And I think I will stop there, Ellen, and hand it over back to you.
Thanks a lot, Ingrid. That's looking great. Also, so I realize now that the number of use cases that were already downloaded from the FAIRsFAIR project and seen from the FAIRsFAIR project is now even moved forward also within the FAIR Impact project. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to all speakers for today. I also would like to thank the audience. If you have any question, I think we still have time. If you have a question, there's nothing in the chat now, but if you do, please. If you do have a question, please put it there. If not, yeah, thank you for being there. Thank you for listening. And we will share the recording and slides on the DANS website soon. And if you have any questions, please contact us and we will try to answer. No question in the chat as far as I can see. Yeah, so thank you, Ingrid, Ego, and Claudia. And looking forward to see the audience again in our next DANS data trail, which is not exactly planned yet, but watch the DANS website and we will let you know. I'll stop the workshop right now if there's nothing else. No, I don't see any questions anymore. So, end meeting.